program, and you've really got some highlights in there, like the Murdoch Children's Institute tomorrow.
Yeah.
A real highlight in terms of the trips. So.
Yeah.
And then you're off to Tassie.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thursday, so we have a day there.
Dealing with the green transition possibilities between our country.
Yes, yeah. I know there's been a lot of work, engagement between our officials and your teams as well. It's been a real focus. The minister's joining us at lunch and to continue that conversation about the...
Continuing to
Everywhere.
a lot of the work this is the
Honourable Minister Shing, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a pleasure to be here, and it was a great way to start this event by walking around a little bit of Prahran to get an understanding of what's changing, the ambition for the area, and you know, it's actually my old hometown. I lived here for 3 years. And a lot's changed since there, but there's one thing that's still there, and that's the Prahran pool. It's a place where I used to swim in the morning before work. So it was lovely to see that that hasn't changed. So my personal connection only goes back a few decades, but to talk about urban renewal, we must go a little bit further back in time. Back to the 1950s and through to the 1970s, where urban renewal became a dominant approach to development in both Denmark and Australia. The post-war period was marked by an urgent need and want to improve housing standards and modernise cities. New building materials and construction methods proved cheaper than labour-intensive, craft-based refurbishment. And as a result, new buildings were widely considered as more economically advantageous than repairing the old. Restoration, it was said, was simply not worth the cost. However, in the 1980s, a counter-movement began to gather momentum. A growing awareness emerged that demolition did not only erase bricks and mortar, it also erased culture and history. And as awareness of climate change increased, so too did the incentive to reuse and to build more sustainably. The economic argument for demolition in itself no longer was enough. Decades later, in the autumn of 2021, visions for future Danish construction were presented in a pavilion at the annual design fair in Milan. I happened to be there, and at the dinner that followed, I took the opportunity to approach Anders Linér, the architect behind the pavilion. Partly, of course, to hear more about his thinking, but also because I had a little idea. An idea involving him and an old, disused workshop building in our backyard. It was far, and I mean very far, from the large-scale project of the kind he would normally undertake. So I thought, why not see if there could be any interest, he could have any interest in transforming the building, using existing sustainable building practices, and at the same time create a free space to innovate and develop new sustainable solutions. Hopefully he didn't just feel obliged, but he answered politely and correctly that he would first need to see the construction. Fortunately, he saw potential in the old two-storey building, as you can see on the right. It doesn't look very like it has great potential there, because it had a strong and beautiful structure, and it was built from good, solid materials. And so, the reimagining of a building evolved into a circular construction site with creative freedom to experiment and play. The fundamental premise was simple. Every material that could be, should be, reused in a circular and climate responsible way, minimizing consumption and the environmental impact. And any materials sourced should be as local as possible and already used or considered as waste by others. So if we take a look at some of the examples that are in the pictures behind me. So the original structure, as you first saw, this was preserved, it was raised, and it was lifted onto a new type of screw foundation. So instead of using concrete foundations. All the roof tiles were removed carefully, cleaned, and then relaid. The floorboards were taken up and transformed into the walls and the panels. And the facade boards, which were covered in old lead paint, were cleaned and then newly coated using a traditional Japanese charring method called shusugiban, which is free from chemical process. And then even the concrete floor foundation, this was cut into very large, big squares, taken up, and then grinded back to give it a terrazzo effect, and then laid back as new flooring, and without any use of new concrete. And this was something that had never been done before. And it took them actually a few trial and errors to get it right. And then from other sources, we harvested Greenlandic marble that was on its way to destruction, and defective manufactured windows. PET plastic bottle fragments that had no other viable use were repurposed for acoustic insulation. And all the internal carpentry is made from waste wood. And the statement stair, there was a picture of it in the pictures, was a beautiful big piece of granite that we sourced from the castle's own material depot. So they're just a few of the examples. There are many more. My husband and I followed the project from the beginning to the end, and it was fascinating to see what can be achieved by building with what already exists. And we were thrilled with the beautiful result, and there is a certain atmosphere that envelopes you when you are in what we call the circular annex. Now, the idea of using this building was actually to create a space for our children to be with their friends instead of in the room next to us making a lot of noise. And, you know, they were excited about having their own space. But this project just took a life of its own. And what we ended with was this spectacular, beautiful annex that I didn't want to let the children in. So it took a little bit of time for them to win me over and say, come on, it was built so that we could be here. Anyway, that's probably the best proof that aesthetics and sustainability can go hand in hand. Now, the annex has become a small but tangible demonstration of what future Danish construction can look like. The building itself may be unique, but the new methods and solutions developed are transferable and hopefully capable of inspiring others. No two retrofit projects are the same, and not all buildings are suitable for retrofitting. Reuse and recycling begin not with a blank sheet of paper, where anything is theoretically possible, but with an existing context and with constraints that demand creativity. Your buildings here in Melbourne have their own context and their own field of possibilities. Yet every time waste becomes a resource and something new is built with something old, we extend the life of not only our buildings, but the life of our culture, our shared heritage, and ultimately of our planet. Denmark and Australia share a common ground in many areas, and there is so much we can learn from each other. And together, we can continue to build and shape cities that honour both our past, but also take a responsibility for the future. Thank you.